All right, I see we have Zaki here. Zaki, how you doing?
Doing good.
Good stuff, man. So I think we'll just get right into it. And while I feel like everyone in the audience kind of knows who y'all are, I think it's nice to just start with intros very quickly. So I'll kind of go down the line. I'd love if we could just like give a quick intro, what you've been up to, any fun stories of the week. We kind of talked with Jarrell and Alex already. But yeah, I'll kind of start with you, Zaki, just to get a fresh voice. How have you been, and just what have you been up to?
Yeah, I've just been sort of living quarantine life. Uh, I'm in California, pretty much hanging out, staying in, working all the time because there's nothing else to
Yeah,
do.
so
um,
that's where it
yeah,
is. But yeah,
uh,
I think just so people know, like, what's your kind of role? How do you like? Where do you work at? Just so people know. Um,
so I'm the co-founder of a company called Occlusion. We do blockchain validation, protocol development, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
I'm mostly known for my work on Cosmos. I sort of ran the whole like launch of Cosmos, and I've been organizing the Stargate upgrade to launch IBC,
yeah.
and that is almost done. And yeah, it's nice to finally finish the Cosmos right.
I love it. No, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, Jarrell, you said in the chat. I mean, Zaki's just a goat, and I very much agree with that. Let's move on to
Thank you. That's
Alex.
very nice.
Alex, how have you been? And if you could give a quick intro to anyone in the audience, that'd be perfect.
Hi, so I'm Alex. I'm one of the co-founders of Near. At Near, I mostly work on research, and I run the team that builds the chain, the actual sort of lowest level there. Yeah, that's I guess all about me.
I love it. That's sweet. And then Jarrell, quick intro as you as well for you, kind of what you work on, what you do.
Yeah, my name is Jarrell James. I work on all sorts of things at C Labs right now, but like my passionate focus is really just onboarding developers in founders in developing or emerging markets and developing nations. It's cool to see people come up with solutions to their own problems and to actually see them work. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah, that's dope. And I'll just kind of end it off. I'm Nishan, so I'm a CS junior at Berkeley, so I'm a little starstruck right now seeing y'all here. Y'all are some legends. But yeah, I'm in blockchain at Berkeley. I've been kind of I really got into this only a year ago, but it's been like quite a journey. I was at Coinbase last summer, and it's been pretty fun. So just kind of doing my thing, just learning what this is all about. And I think I'd like to just kind of dive in right in with you guys. So this panel is about interoperability. It's a big topic. And I think just to set the stage for it, we all know that interoperability is so important, and I think that's kind of a given. But I think it's nice to kind of emphasize that for everyone else, real quick. I think to you guys, I'll just do a quick like roundtable. Like, why is interoperability so important for blockchains? And if you guys have any like cool stories, kind of current events, examples you like to bring up, just to like set the stage for interoperability, that would be perfect. So if y'all have any kind of cool stories to tell, reasons, subtle reasons that people might not realize about interoperability, that would be perfect. So I'll let whoever wants to take it
Okay,
start us off.
I'll start off with some stories.
Let's do it.
So the first point I'll make is like all blockchains are interoperable. All blockchains have always been interoperable. Whether that interoperability has been like exchanges that like have like withdrawals and trading between like the centralized exchange world, on-chain light clients, like all of these things. There's like interoperability isn't new. What is new is that we have a lot of blockchains.
Yeah.
And I think the question is really, and most blockchains are turning from being one block, and in the effort to scale Ethereum is also turning from one blockchain into many blockchains.
Right.
And so this is why interoperability is important and makes a big difference, because what we want to present users is like a coherent user experience across everywhere that they might want to interact with the blockchain. And we currently do a terrible job.
Yeah. Can you give almost like just to visualize like some examples of like how terrible of a job we're doing right now? I mean, what is it like for someone right now if they want to say interact with DeFi or just like work with another any sort of app?
Like if you hold your assets on chain, where is your money? Like, does anyone know?
Yeah. Yeah, and exactly.
And I think that's really like, I think that, you know, it's that's as like as we start to engage more users directly with protocols, it's really hard for any user to have like a coherent view of, you know, what they're interacting with, what software objects that they have control over, what roles, responsibilities they might have. You know, you're staking here, you're validating there, you've got a CDP opened over here. Like, you know, it works right now. I mean, if you really are fully engaged in everything blockchain, it's like multiple full-time jobs.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I could add to that.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like, I think that interoperability probably should have been boring. It should have been a boring conversation to have, like, as an industry, because if we weren't a decentralized industry, this would have just been conversations of standards that happened in closed rooms, like without it really this public involvement. I think the public involvement aspect has caused like interoperability to become almost this like buzzword for, oh, our chain is the most interoperable, our chain is bridges, we are this like group hub, you know? And I think in reality it's just that interoperability is for chains to be able to communicate to each other and assets to be shared freely, or anything that you're really trying to program. And one of the things I want to stress is, like Zaki was saying, there's like just a ton of chains now. And yeah, I think we should probably have more stress on this idea that like one chain can do one thing. And the fact that it is now interoperable with this internet of blockchains allows it to just be like every other industry tech that has ever existed, kind of. It's like, it just does its one thing. One of the things I loved about Centrifuge, I don't work for Centrifuge, I work for Celo, but from early on, one of the things they were like, yeah, we're just trying to do payments, like for people who are getting their checks, their payroll. And I was like, and that's all you're trying to sell me on? It's all you're saying to me is payroll? And so it was kind of refreshing. So I think that's something that I'm looking forward to, especially with C Labs, is like we're seeing use cases for people that you need a mobile money like infrastructure. We're not going to like try and spend all our time at C Labs building out DeFi platforms to test out whether or not there's user bases are there. Those user bases want access to Ethereum, and those bridges will get built to Ethereum to allow them to have that. And that's we're out here to try and create like global money access and prosperity on a mobile infrastructure. And that allows us to do that really well. And interoperability allows them to get more value out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. Alex, I'll let you close us off. Any extra thoughts?
Yes. So I see interoperability helping in several big ways. So if you think about what blockchains enable, they enable many things, but one of them is they break many walled gardens, right? So for example, payments now can be done cross-border, and hopefully within several years we're going to see developing services which are not just financial services, but also services like in social ownership, etc., and other areas which are interoperable and not walled gardens that try to keep users within them, but allow users, to be using a wider set of tools. And up until now, I think interoperability technology exists, but well-working decentralized interoperability solutions are just emerging. And so until this moment, I think blockchains on themselves kind of operate as walled gardens. And this is something that is changing rapidly right now. And in the short term, like a good short-term example would be, we're shipping relatively soon a thing called Rainbow Bridge, which enables a fully trustless connection between using light clients on both ends between Near and Ethereum, right? And so today, for many businesses that existed on Ethereum or which want to launch on Ethereum, they're just not viable because of the cost of transactions. So for many of them, value that they provide is just not meaningful with the transaction cost that exists. But now you can move assets to Near, transact there with a cheaper cost, and then move back and continue interacting with the services you already have in the ecosystem. So this is value for both ends and for the society, right? It's value for Ethereum because assets now have more use cases. It's obviously value for Near because it brings assets and for people. And if you think long term, so I like example what Jarrell started saying, right? So Celo's mission, the way I see Celo's mission, right, is to give access to financial, not even to financial instruments, but even like to the most basic access to money to people in the developing countries where today this is very limited, right? And this is a focus of Celo. While, for example, Near's focus is quite different, especially for many people in the community of Near, is to build open web and tooling for open web. which is very complementary. And so now if they deeply integrate it, if you think about entrepreneur in one of the developing countries, now they can start building open web or like some social essential services, which are way more needed in their markets than in our markets, right? Where like government surveillance is a big problem, for example, right? So now they can start building the services and they can monetize them easily and like go to their market because of the efforts of Celo to make people have that money on the mobile phones, right? And so now like entire new businesses and markets which would not exist without this deep connection between multiple systems will emerge, right? So this is like interoperability will enable quite a few things that are not possible today.
Yeah, that's ideal. I mean,
Alex is really
Yeah.
Alex is hinting at something that I think the Near and Celo teams are getting really close to, which is where like we're starting to see like, hey, they're onboarding a bunch of people who want to just build open dApps and innovate on solutions, and we're actually seeing a huge portion of our community sitting here like, hey, we get it. We have access to money. This is really cool. We don't want to cash out. We want to keep it inside of like the network. So how do we do more with it? And so it's been something that we're really exploring. And so tune into Near's town hall on December 7th. I'll just say that. But yeah, I really agree with that. It's just like, I mean, I don't mean to jack the track of your talk here, Nishan, but like,
this is
one of the
your
things,
talk, not mine. So y'all
one of the things that I
over.
think is so crazy about our like space is that we're just dealing with the back end of what was essentially really aggressive tribalism that's finally like skittered out. And I think it's more important for us to start having the conversations around like corporate interoperability. Like what happens when Facebook actually does have Libra and or like Google has their own currency, and those are aspects where like us being interoperable and Near doing what they're doing with they're just bringing in a new asset. They're just looking at it as like we're bringing in Libra, or we're bringing in Libra into the Celo ecosystem and allowing people to just, it's not like it should be some really big dramatic us versus the corporate entities type conversation. And there is this fear that I see in our community where we're spending another 2-3 years, just like we were with ETH and Bitcoin, squabbling amongst ourselves when we could just actually be innovating and building solutions. And if somebody wants to use that asset, they can use that asset, and we don't have to sit around and like twiddle our thumbs about it.
Why judge? No, I love that. Zaki, do you want to build off anything here? I'd love to hear kind of like the Cosmos perspective, the occlusion perspective. This is dope. And yeah, Jarrell, by the way, this is y'all's talk as well. Like I'm just here to kind of chat with y'all and enjoy, to be honest. So yeah, Zaki, anything you'd like to bring up?
All I'll say is I think that like sort of the vision that I'm sort of on board of right now is like sort of a composability maximalist vision. We've spent we've spent a lot of time and energy on like consensus protocols and like layer one blockchain infrastructure and stuff like that. And I suspect that we're finally starting to get to the point where that stuff is maybe good enough. And what's terrible right now is custody wallets, coherent views of where your stuff is and how to interact with it. And a lot of that is like kind of starting to be like where like my thinking is going. I think the challenge that Cosmos is starting to think about and address and like trying to deal with in an open agnostic way is this question of like how do you actually build we've spent blockchains are the web servers. We still haven't built the web browser.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah, that's literally perfect. So I think, Jarrell, I think it's nice that we've kind of like set up the problem now. We've set up, okay, this is what we need to focus on. So we brought up like these problems of like, okay, tribalism. We're like just a bunch of like interconnected. I mean, not like a bunch of like dispersed like little parts.
Yeah.
What's kind of next? How do we
like AOL CDs were money?
Yeah.
Then you would understand like why tribalism that we would be like I'm old.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean like he's got a point.
I remember the 90s. I remember all of these like every when the internet started, like every way of getting online, they sent you CDs in the mail. And like blockchains are a lot like that, except for the fact that like the CDs they send you are digital assets that are freely exchangeable, and it's censorship.
Yeah.
They're all over the world.
And I have a question for
that's
you.
definitely something that I mean, that's definitely something I wanted to like address, is because like I think that's something that we're seeing, and what we're talking about with interoperability is what we're talking about, what everybody experienced after 2017. Suddenly a bunch of people checked in on your roadmaps and were like, hey, is any of this actually getting built? Is any of this going to actually work? And what we're seeing with interoperability is just the idea of like mutually assured development. Like if we can actually set these standards early and we can kind of come to a conclusion on how to create this, it's really beneficial for everybody. But the other thing is, and like Zaki's touching on it, when you're like, if that is an asset that's openly fungible, there's a huge fear from the migration of assets from one chain to another, and you've already seen that happen a lot. And then there's also like, I think that same fear around like if corporate coins get involved and we have all this established power that Bitcoin and like the Ethereum community has, does it all just move over there? And then do our standards matter at all? And so, I mean, I totally get what Zaki's saying. I just think we can't, I don't think we can corral that monster.
It's interesting. I think, we kind of brought up this concept of like, okay, this idea of tribalism. How do we start breaking that down? On what level do we like are you guys most focused on right now in terms of breaking down this like mentality that people have built up over like the last few years, where you're just like, oh, hey, you have to choose your side, choose your
I'll give
your
an
L1.
example.
Yeah.
I'll give an example with Zaki, because I was last year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I was like, we were setting out to build TBTC back when I was at Thesis. And it was like, hey, we think we have a good way of doing this. It's James Presswich's SPV design. And we're like, we think we can do this. And then we're like, yeah, it doesn't matter if we think we can do this. How do we get everyone else to think that we can do this? And so there's this issue of tribalism that I was trying to get around.
Right.
And so what we ended up doing was like, I reached out to Zaki and a bunch of other people, about 45, 50 people in total from around the industry, brought them all to the penthouse, or the whatever penthouse apartment that Polychain used to have in SF. And we're like, hey, let's actually do this like they used to do it. Let's have the standards conversation. Like it isn't a behind the closed doors thing. Whatever conclusions we come to here around what good design is, we take that to the internet literally tonight and let everybody, and we did. And within like, I think by 3 a.m., it had been like just the initial questions that had come up had been like retweeted like 1,000 times and 600 comments of all these people giving in options on what like the design consensus had been. But from there on out, it was like trying to avoid that tribalism by kind of coming back to this core group that we knew understood all of the assets and facets of the industry and getting their feedback.
Yeah. Zaki, Alex, what are your takes kind of on this?
I think that tribalism was, I think in the last 2 years, I don't see it as represented. So I guess in some areas of the blockchain crypto space, it still exists, but with many ecosystems, it's just not as present, right? So I think Cosmos is one of the earliest examples of non-tribalism, or like non-tribalist, ecosystem that I saw, right? So like a couple years ago when NEAR was just starting and we were exploring and trying to do like the most basic things, like, joint events, for example. Cosmos was always there, Zaki was always there joining. And the same, like Celo, Polkadot, there's also Fluence, smaller project from Russia, and several others. So there's this community of protocols where people, like effectively, where I guess people who initiate them and then people who join those communities, their primary goal is not shilling their coins. The goal is innovate and build, brighter future. And so I think their tribalism just sort of doesn't even emerge to begin with.
Yeah, I like that. Jarrell?
I mean, it's also like both Celo and NEAR are like the two most like proximate candidates for a non-Cosmos block, like non-Tendermint chain that supports IBC. I think today we announced that the Interchain Foundation is funding Chorus One, working on IBC support for Celo chain, and like NEAR is mostly just like, can you get when will someone get around to it? But like I think that gets to my biggest thing about tribalism right now is I think a lot of tribalism is now at this point really just related to people trying to like manage the like cognitive load of so many things. It's like, every day, every morning I wake up and there's like a near meeting I could go to, a Celo meeting I could go to, a Cosmos meeting I could go to.
Yeah.
Like there's not 5 of me.
Yeah.
That's true. I was
True.
about to like hit on the point of like interoperability of communities. I mean, we have all these different communities. Okay, there's like a community call for X, Y, Z. How are communities? How do you guys see communities building and like meshing and growing together as well? Because I guess that's kind of another side to things. Jarrell, you were maybe about to hit on it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of this. I think one of the things you can look at from like community growth in Web3 is that it's super like viral and it attracts a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that like what we've seen from like the communities that are built in the last couple of years is anywhere near to what you actually see if there's access to these currencies globally. From just the stuff that I've seen on Celo, how people are doing just like they got access to Valora wallets and they're just like doing lotteries in their friend groups and they're like, hey, let's earn interest on this, and then whoever wins the lottery for this week gets paid out the interest. Like that type of community isn't something that we're naturally or culturally in the United States or my own like East Africa are gonna think of that right away. But in Latin America, they're like, yeah, we're gonna get in there, we're gonna find some way to like create this like gambling market, as well as like those types of kind of resources that they're trying to manage, where they're like, hey, we're trying to do plastic and we're trying to create a market and a secondary market for pressed plastic and for non-pressed plastic, and we're using Celo to do it. I'm never going to be able to, as a community person or ever if I work for a company, be like, hey, did anyone check in on the pressed plastic Celo USD like community Telegram today? Like, so one of the things is I think you just create the use cases and get users and developers building the solutions using those use cases, and then just allow the machine to make its own communities and like I think create good openings for people to get praise and to highlight the work that they've done, which I think Near is like us is very into developer research and kind of getting the feedback from people who are building.
Yeah, Alex, I was about to pass it to you. Is there anything you've noticed from the Near side of things?
So to answer the questions about the sort of interoperability of communities, I want to approach it from a very different side. I think one of the communities which is very interoperable is the community of validators, which sort of emerge and exist almost on its own, right? So many professional validators, especially, they usually work on all the chains, and so there's a lot of knowledge transfer, and this knowledge transfer goes then it propagates to the protocols themselves, right? So like if people validate, let's say Cosmos, or they validate Coda or Celo or Solana, and they hit some issues, they hit some suboptimalities, let's put it this way, right? So that information quickly propagates between sort of like, there's a separate community of Near validators, there's a community of Cosmos validators, but because of the large intersection, information flows very, very quickly. And so good ideas and solutions to some issues that are discovered somewhere else before they even get discovered on another chain, they get very quickly propagated and implemented. All right, so this is a very good example. And I think this community emerged first because the incentives are most aligned. So usually the community that is closest to the sort of profits and money will emerge the first, right? So this community emerged first, but I think there's going to be more communities which are going to be also cross-protocol communities of developers, communities of I don't know, liquidity providers, etc. As other protocols develop, I think those communities are going to be cross-protocol, and a lot of information will be flowing and making the ecosystem flourish collectively.
Love it. Zaki, any of your kind of thoughts around this interoperability community?
I think this community is going I think that a lot of like for instance, the validator community right now is spread very thin. When I started first trying to organize a validator community to do the Cosmos launch, we've maybe like 4 or 5x that, but we've probably 30x the number of blockchains that have existed. And so, I would say that most validators feel, we feel, at Occlusion, we feel spread very thin over the relatively small number of blockchains that we validate on, and a lot of people that are doing a lot of companies validate on many more blockchains than we do. And I suspect that it's just going to end up being a little this is the challenge that everybody in this sort of inter-protocol world faces. On one hand, you want to hedge your risk of betting on any one protocol, any one asset, any one community, because what if it just completely flops? On the other hand, there is a benefit to specialization. There is a benefit to being mostly Cosmos or mostly Solana, or kind of sitting on the bridge between thing A and thing B. And so I imagine that there's going to be a lot more specialization in this space as just as a way of managing complexity. And it's going to look a lot more like, hey, I know who to, when I want to deal with interoperability issues between two platforms, you'll know who to call and be like, hey, they probably have a good deal of experience with how these two things interoperate.
Nice.
I think is going to be a lot more of the thing. And you see this also with Figment and Bison Trails launching data services and stuff like that, because all of that's just as critical for the interoperability piece.
Nice. Yeah, Jarrell, I think you were going to hop in.
Yeah, I kind of forgot my track of thought. I got distracted by the the answer that Zaki was giving. Okay, so one of the things that I look forward in the interoperability community as well, because back in the day, it really was only worth, but back in the day, I literally mean a year and a half ago, it was really only worth it to do a real push because there was tribalism in ETH and Bitcoin, and so there was a community that needed to be developed there. But Alexander was saying earlier, we aren't really seeing the effects of that tribalism as much anymore. But for the community side of things on Celo, it's I see interoperability communities as if you just coming up across okay, yeah, now we have access to Aave, and we have access to these other DeFi instruments on Celo because this bridge is being built.
Right.
That community is just going to be people who are yeah, now I've been making money and I can cash out easily in Brazil via Celo, but I'm not going to be able to know who they are. But I guarantee you, like I said earlier, that interoperability community is way 100 times larger than anything that we have today, and this majorly German, Western European, and American, Asian community that's all focused on interoperability right now doesn't quite compare to the actual global impact of. But I also wanted to talk about we're kind of avoiding the big elephant in the room, which is CBDCs and whether or not they actually do intend to be interoperable with other chains. And you guys can find, there's an IMF panel that Renee Reisenberg, the CEO or the COO is of C Labs is on, and it's kind of talking about, hey, there's room for CBDCs to do really well here. I do suggest taking some industry standards from the already existing decentralized community, for instance, permissionless decentralized network, and applying that to your CBDC, and starting that conversation. So that community, particularly that interoperability community, to me actually kind of scares the crap out of me, because if they choose not to be interoperable with people, for instance, some central governments might choose to do, then we are at a greater impasse for access and ease of finances.
Yeah, Alexander, Zaki, any responses to that? Do you see CBDCs as the elephant in the room here in terms of interoperability?
What is CBDC?
Central bank digital currency.
Central bank digital currency. Yeah.
So my impression is that the Communist Party of China and their efforts on central bank digital currency have been far more open to interoperability than Western government efforts. And this, I think, what I would say is is like, see, like this is where blockchains touch geopolitics, and it seems like, you know, like blockchains and like the intersection between blockchains and geopolitics seemed very present before the pandemic happened, and they feel like they've receded a lot, and blockchains have become a lot more of this like fun money games place.
Yeah, internet.
Which honestly I like better than the geopolitics. But I imagine the geopolitics will make a roaring comeback, and I think that the question will be, and again, like you have these like the biggest and most surprising thing to me about interoperability is that we expected that custodial wrapped assets would be far more constrained from a regulatory point of view like 5 years ago than they have turned out to be. Regulators are like, we know that these custodial wrapped assets are being used among pseudonymous actors, and among pseudonymous actors, and we're fine with it. And that is a really crazy outcome, both in terms of like its impacts on interoperability, which are large, but also in how that's going to play with the whole like central bank digital currency efforts.
So you're saying it basically doesn't matter if wrapped assets don't actually create that much of a friction point, then maybe an uninteroperable central dollar wouldn't actually be an issue.
Themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so do you guys know sufficiently enough about how CBDC works in terms of, like, is it possible to track headers on Ethereum chain, or is it possible to have multi-sig? Like, is it possible to build TCBDC?
Oh man.
Well, I think that's the question. Yeah. I don't think anybody has really come across those issues yet, because there hasn't, as far as I know. I think China's the only one that's trying to do the centralized currency like live, for real, but or sorry, a blockchain version of it. But I don't know. That's the question: is that if they aren't interoperable with the standards layers that are like built right now, let's say Celo does become successful. Let's say it does become this grand like use case for a bunch of mobile phone users around the planet, and like with the growing audience of more and more mobile phone users, then suddenly they're comfortable with this asset on their phones as an exchange between them and their neighbors. That's as local as it needed to be. And so now for like a global entity to be like, oh, that's not accepted on like our exchange, they're just going to find ways around that the same way we're talking about ways around it. So I think what's actually happening right now, and Zaki touched on it too, like we've seen the blockchain recede from the global geopolitical stage. But I think what's also happening right now is that I don't think central banks or anybody is really feeling like they have the brass to start flexing on anybody right now, just because of the way that global markets look and like their uncertainty for the future. So I think what we're seeing right now is, even though we've receded a little bit, you're starting to see some of the central banks realizing that they need to get involved in the digital currency game, because there's really only one market that isn't going straight down
right now. Yeah.
So
man, that's pretty awesome. I think what's crazy right now is that we literally only have a couple more minutes left. So I think what I'm going to do for us is just how about we just go around, and I think from each of you, I'd love to hear kind of a big takeaway that you want like someone watching this to get. What's kind of your like send off to someone who's watching this right now? What do you want them to really get out of interoperability right now and take to the world and like take as their call to action? I'll start with you, Jarrell, just to start off there.
Yeah, if you're young and you're in the game and you're trying to like, oh man, should I be really worried about interoperability? I mean, yes, but you should strive for a future where we don't really have to think about it, and we don't have to have these like conversations as much anymore, because really we should be striving for a future where the reality where you like swipe your card and all those processes that happen behind you with the global infrastructure, banks like sending each other IOUs. I don't care about that when I buy my like coffee. And so we should be striving for a future where, once again, we don't care about any of that stuff happening, and it's that easy and simple. Exactly. The focus right now is to maintain our sovereignty as decentralized networks and decentralized like users who find value in this currency, maintain our sovereignty and like take these standards forward. And hopefully someday never have to talk about this again.
I know this is, like you said at the beginning, this is supposed to be like a boring topic. So I hope
Should have
if we
been.
do this in a year, 2 years, 3 years, it's just the most boring conversation ever. So prayers up for that. Zaki, I'll go with you next.
So all I'll say is that we're sort of right at the beginning of interoperability becoming like a far more of like interoperability becoming a lot more interesting. I think that the one of the things that I think has been interesting is like, again, like I think, like I said, I think this like wrapped asset thing is like by far like one of the biggest sort of stories in the interoperable game. Because the other thing that it has done is taken off a lot of like the like stupidest use case, which is just like we're gonna like token A moves to token like I have token A on chain A, I want to move it to chain B, and made it a lot less of it's like the easiest technical lift of that, which is just trust the custodian, is suddenly now is becoming a solution. So that's going to drive everything in the interoperability space to sort of higher levels of abstraction and higher end use cases, which I think is going to be exciting.
Yeah. Do you think that this kind of like this wrapped attitude and kind of like this way of like kind of going through a custodian, is that what you want right now? Is there something more that you're looking for? Is it kind of like, okay, that's how things are going to be? You think it's exciting, but is there more that we can like?
I definitely think I think there's more, and there's a lot more. But I also like, I think that it has very much changed the economics of the way interoperability players have to look at things. Like anyone who's starting, I'm building, Occlusion's building products in the interoperability space, as would be obvious that we would do. And like we've had to really recalibrate our product roadmap for this landscape.
Right, that's dope. Alexander, you're gonna finish us off, man.
So I want to, the final message that I want to deliver is sort of targeting the developers and entrepreneurs who are about to start some businesses today. It takes around a year or more to build something from inception to production. So the world in a year will look very different than now. By that point, I think most of the bridges will already be established, right? So definitely majority of chains will be connected to Ethereum, and quite a few links in between will be established. So it's right now thinking about what is possible when you have access to all the Ethereum-born assets which we're developing for the past 5 years. When you're in the world in which people have access to the same network of payments without borders all over the globe, and we have access to chains which ultimately scale horizontally to any number of people in the world that can handle 1 billion users, right? So you can actually be building use cases that are targeting general audience. So thinking what is possible with that infrastructure existing and starting building it today, 1 year from now, that infrastructure will be available because of the bridges and because of the networks being developed today. And so starting today, you can solve many problems of the world and be the first in doing so. And so that's something to start digging into and exploring.
Yeah, I love that. The developers out there, I mean, why not be the first? It's pretty awesome. I love that, guys. This is great. Y'all made my job super easy. I just got to chill out, hear from some geniuses, and this is great. So thank you so much. I think this is kind of the session. I think we have to probably move on to closing remarks. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, I think thanks so much, y'all.
I just want to say, thanks for having this. And if anyone's actually like, I think that point Alexander's made is really, really important. The world is going to look a lot different in a year from now. And so, I mean, just the general world as well, but like the actual world of like blockchain interoperability. And so I think hedge your bets and say, hey, who do I think is actually consolidated the best, like on and off ramps into other chains? Where can I actually create like value for myself? And I think if you're really aware of the space and aware of people who are just building from a research perspective, you'll find the right areas to start your own businesses. And
Love it. All right, good stuff, y'all. I think let's call it. All right, thanks so much, guys.
Peace.
Am I live? Yay! That was a great panel. That was a great panel. I personally have learned a lot, and I hope the rest of the audience find that talk on interoperability quite educational and aspirational as well. Thank you, Zaki, Jarrell, Alexander, and Nishan for this genuine and insightful conversation. It's just the perfect wrap-up, not only for Behind the Chain, but also for this week. And I just realized yesterday that we accidentally picked a Friday the 30th for our first Behind the Chain. And again, thank you to our moderators and speakers for making the time to share your thoughts with us. We're very glad and honored to connect everyone through this conference. Also, let me say thank you to our audience for joining. This event would not be a success without you. Lastly, I want to give a huge shout out to the Sparx team, which is full of passionate, hardworking, honest, and talented young people. It's my pleasure to work with you all. And for the next step, we're designing an initiative to fund and empower female researchers and developers. So please stay tuned. If you have any questions for Sparx or would like to collaborate, please reach out to us on Twitter at Sparx or via our website, sparx.io. You can just simply write to us at contact@sparx.io. And if you are in NYC, please give me a shout. I would love to connect with you in person. So with that, I will end Behind the Chain, and thank you everyone. Have a great weekend and stay safe.